Volume 2 Chapter 2. Ainz spun in midair and cut through the level 80 Kaukami that otherwise towered over him. An authentic ice dragon summon, it was on par with the greater fire elemental, with long ice scales and blue eyes with dark pupils. Its snake-like body would wrap around its prey to confine them, and then its great maw would snap down for a devouring. Those things were a problem for lower-level teams in the game, but at this level? Ainz recalled, but now it was barely a challenge, and it was only that much because he didn't have all the warrior skills he needed. When his sword clove the body in two all the way down until his sword struck the sands below, ice shattered like shrapnel over most of the arena. It pinged off of Ainz's armor like easily ignored hail. Lupus Regina, however, dodged like an acrobat, spinning and twisting her limbs and body in the air like a cat. Is she a werewolf, or a werecat? Ainz joked to himself before she landed in a prowling posture on all fours with fearless eyes locked on the icy target, ready for the order. Lupus Regina rolled away, and per her master's instructions, shifted to her wolf form and rushed in. The ground tore up under her racing paws, and her claws tore like wild and more tore like she was starving, into the icy flesh. She did almost no damage compared to her master, but for this experiment, that was unimportant. The monster's head fell down with a thunderous crash. It stared at him with defiance, its lips drawing back in a growl, its icy breath wafted from an open mouth so large it could swallow Ainz whole, armor, swords, and all. But it was woefully outmatched. Ainz swung his blades in a constant hack, cutting his way through the snout and jaw until he reached what passed for its brain, and with a decisive blow that scattered shards of ice in all directions, it died. The entire beast went limp, and then vanished. Good, now to check my XP, and Lupus Regina's. This was their 8th experiment, and still he had seen nobody else from Nazarick, and put off all requests from the others to come and see him. I am busy with an urgent matter. Ensure my last orders have been carried out, and I remain undisturbed until I summon you one by one. That had been Ainz's answer, and every subsequent plea had been similar, only increasingly more curt. Not that he didn't feel any guilt. The dreaded sensation that he was tormenting his friends' children by keeping away from them was like nails on a chalkboard to his conscience, and yet the possibility of what might happen was too dreadful to him in too many ways to let him give in to their plea. The Kaukami had been quite valuable, at least relative to the other beings he'd encountered thus far, and more importantly it was a safe opponent. Easily defeated, and yet also netting a reasonable amount of XP. When Ainz checked Lupus Regina, however, he was shocked. Impressive, very impressive. He thought when she knelt before him with eyes downcast, she had indeed gained substantial XP, totaling 29% of his own. It seems that their racial levels don't count, but in each of my duels, she has managed to gain a percentage equivalent to her total job class levels. So, a level 1 warrior might gain 1% of what I gain in the course of a duel. Nothing at all worth speaking of at first, but for a high-powered monster like this relative to the New World? The possibilities opened up in Ainz's mind. Only one question remained. New Worlders seem unable to check their relative skills, but I can. What if I were to formally make a New World member my servant? Could I increase their skills sufficiently to make them useful? It had been a question that haunted his brain for weeks. Workers were such a perfect idea, he couldn't get away from it, though he also turned his mind to the ex-adventurers that intended to settle in Kani. Loyalty is always an issue. Ainz mused, but there are ways to ensure it, to win it. Enri and fear, they're proof of that. Shall I summon another, my lord? Cocytus asked his master in the silent interval. Ainz thought it over, then asked, the Guardians have had regular intelligence meetings while I've been gone, isn't that right? Yes, my lord. Cocytus answered, cocking his head at the unlooked-for question. How far has Momon's reputation spread? Ainz asked, and Cocytus knelt to answer. The adventurers praise Momon in Erantal. Word is spreading also throughout Riastais through Blue Rose. They used flight magic to return with great speed. The little one has been especially vocal. Within a few weeks, through message spells and travel, Momon and Lupu of Team Axel will be household names. Cocytus was openly proud of his master, though it was only Ainz's general understanding of the Guardian's body language that let him recognize it. Good, we'll need to do a few more jobs just to seal that reputation. Which reminds me. Ainz turned his eyes back to the kneeling Lupus Regina. You made those two into sort of pets, didn't you? Ainz asked, and he didn't need to be clearer. Lupus Regina gave a wolfish grin up at him and shifted back the form of a beautiful red-haired maid. Nina and Henry?
Yes, my lord.
Nina is a funny little thing, and that Henry smelled like a bitch in heat for her man. They're both fun playthings.
Lupus Regina giggled girlishly before covering her mouth to stifle the undignified noise.
I see, we're going to go back that way and do a few more jobs before we go to the capital of Riestais. Would you like to look in on them? Ines asked, and his servant nodded rapidly like a dog that had its eyes locked on a treat in her master's moving hand.
Unable to resist, Ines removed his onyx-armored glove and patted the top of the battle-maid's head. Her vibrant red hair was soft, even luxuriantly so, and reminded him of that of a dog he'd touched once. It gave a little under his touch, and when he patted, she pressed her head reflexively into his palm. He could feel the warmth beneath, and it was only reluctantly that he took his hand away. Then we will, but first, we do this until we both gain a level. Ines answered, then drew his swords again.
All right, Cocytus, summon another one. He ordered, and Lupus Regina rushed over the sands, scattering the surface of the arena behind her in her urgency to move out of range until her master's order to attack would bring her forward again. Nina and the rest of her team were quick about organizing the village. The initial glee at seeing the dead body of the entitled noble and his guards, however, settled into fear within hours. That very morning, the village elder called a meeting in the village square. Nina looked them all over. They were dirty, far from well-fed, and exceedingly scruffy with unkempt beards and gnarled, hardened hands. There was no real order to speak of among the village. The oldest men milled about in front with their wives, with the younger members behind them. There was no discipline or consistency among them but the fact of their poverty and hunger. Growling bellies spoke to one another of their hunger. Up at the front, the village elder, a frail old man, put their feelings into words in simple terms. Leaning on his staff and shaking from age and fear, he said, "If we turn the visitors in, the Lord's Lord may spare us. That is our best hope." Nina and her teammates stood off to the side, apart from the gathering. She spat in the direction of the bloody ground where dead noble Brat's body had been lying until a short while ago. "You're dreaming, old man," Peter said, echoing Nina's sentiment, his arms folded in front of his chest. "Nina," he turned to his teammate and looked down at her, "what is the penalty for striking a nobleman?" "Death," she answered reflexively. "And what is the penalty for rebellion against the crown?" Peter asked further. "Also death," Nina answered, and the hush came over the crowd. "You all look hungry. Am I wrong?" Peter asked, and growling bellies answered him. "Your lord sends most of your food up to his lord, and leaves you very little to eat." Now somebody said that wasn't actually the lord, just one of his sons. "I don't know what it was like here, but I'm guessing even if he'll forgive you for this, his lord won't. So, will your local lord back your rebellion, or his master?" Peter probed, and the silence held until the village elder answered. "His master." Voices of fear and trembling went up from the villagers. Mothers clung to their young children and husbands to their wives. Nina stared, her eyes sweeping the group with frantic urgency. "They'll make an example of you all, you know they will. Your lives are nothing, nothing to them. Wiping out a village and then scooping up a group of people from somewhere else and dropping them here has no more meaning to them than changing clothes." She slammed her fist down into her open palm. "You didn't want this, I get that, and I'm sorry I forced it, but it is forced. If you want us to go, we'll go, but if we stay, we can help you. It'll be a while before the brat is missed, and that's our chance," Nina urged them, then Lucret interjected. He scratched his head and let out a troubled sigh. "Look, the truth is this place is done for. Even if we fight, that's good for what, a skirmish or two? Then the Baron will send a few hundred armored soldiers and," he snapped his fingers, "that'll be that." "So, what do you want to do?" Nina demanded, and true to form, the ranger had a suggestion. "I say we just abandon the whole place, go to Carney." Mr. Moman mentioned making it his base of operations, and it has walls. Even a baron would think twice about making an enemy out of an adamantite-ranked adventuring team by attacking their residence. Nina thought that over, and so did the rest of the village. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was overwhelming. Carney was a different domain. It had space to spare, actual walls, and above all, an adamantite patron that had the favor of the royal head warrior. That had been on the first day, and several nights later,
Nina found herself explaining the situation to Henry Emmett and her little council. Henry sat at the center of a table that had been set out in the middle of the village square, and at her left and right side, canted like birds' wings, there sat a table of villagers and a table of goblins. At Nina's back, the many families that chose to join her and the former Swords of Darkness, shuffled with eyes downcast, glancing up occasionally through their tear-blurred eyes, seeking to convey their hopeless desperation through their glances. When the diminutive young rebel at heart finished explaining what happened, she couldn't think of anything more to add, so Nina said only, "Please, don't make them pay for what I did. Help me, I beg you," Nina said, and went down to one knee and bowed her head as if Henry was lady of the land herself and not just a village chief. Henry felt her blood run cold at the violence, but not as cold as she expected. "I understand what you want, but you're asking us to risk not only ourselves, but also our benefactors, Ainzul Gaon, and Mr. Momin and Miss Lupu. It's only a matter of time before your lord figures out where you've gone." "Then what?" "I don't know," Nina said, flustered. "Tell them you captured me, offer me to the Baron in exchange for the security of everyone else. I'm the one who killed the Lord's son, nobody else. I'm sorry, I couldn't just watch while he took that girl." Behind her somewhere, Henry heard a young girl begin to sob. The intended victim, Henry concluded, and turned her eyes to the left and right to the two tables. "Well, what do we say? Do we let them stay, offer them sanctuary, and risk a fight? Or do we send them out to die?" Henry clenched her jaw, torn between the safety of her village and the fear felt by those in need. She knew her answer despite what it might cost. "I myself want to let them stay. We can ask Mr. Momin and Master Gaon if they will mind giving us advice on what to do, and if they object, I guess we have no choice. But for now, at least, I say let the newcomers stay. We have lots of land to be worked, don't we?" Henry added, and various heads nodded at both tables. "Jug 'em," Henry said, "they need to get practice right away. After we get them settled on farms, start breaking them into groups for training. We don't want the tragedy we faced to ever happen again." Henry stood up, her palms flat on the table, and while her goblin leader nodded in acknowledgement of her orders, Henry turned her eyes to the newcomers. She then gestured to the goblins at the table. "These goblins are all part of the village too. Treat them like your neighbors. They're part of this village, and if you can't tolerate that, then we can't tolerate you. Am I understood?" Henry leveled her eyes at the disorderly assembly. Nina kept her eyes bowed, and her team went down to one knee with her. The remaining newcomers imitated those who led them to Carney village, and bowed their heads and went down on one knee as well. "That is fair, and thank you, Chief Henry," Nina uttered with breathless thanks. "I'll make sure you don't regret this." And so the assembly broke up, and the village of Carney doubled its numbers in a single day. Within 2 days homes had been assigned among the empty buildings and guests were taken in while new homes were built. Farmlands that would have had to lay fallow were instead parceled out. And before long, Britta and Peter had a whole new crop of people using wooden sticks to train with swords, while Lucrut aided with the bow, and Nina began to organize people into working groups. In Henry's mind, everything was working out marvelously. Within 2 days of that, Nfur returned to open up his workshop in Carney, and working out marvelously became absolute bliss. It was in that blissful state, the heady afterglow of a love-making that left Nfur panting and heaving so that he could barely move, that Henry found herself interrupted. "Miss Henry, there are some dark elf children to see you." The shout from outside snapped her to instant awareness. "Elves are very, very far away from here, but I can think of 2 people who might have some elves in their service. And I wouldn't want to keep either of their servants waiting." Henry recognized and immediately began to throw on her clothing. "I'll be right there," she shouted as she rushed to grab her pants. Volume 2 Chapter 3. Knowing whom her visitors came from, Henry moved as fast as she possibly could to come out and greet them. They were beautiful children, with sharp features, tan skin and heterochromatic eyes that mirrored one another, one green and one blue. The girl in the short white skirt carried a staff and shifted nervously where she stood, her blonde hair waving a little bit with her nervous gestures, while she also wrung her staff like she feared she was in trouble. By contrast, her companion wore a vest and long pants. They were mirrors in more than their eyes. He stood straight and tall and had a bold, energetic expression of confidence. She went down to one knee in front of the pair and bowed her head. "I am Henry Emmett, Chief of Carney Village, you wanted to see me?
Yeah. The one in pants said and looked her over.
Oh, she's a girl, so they're sisters. Henry thought, and raising her head, she smiled at them both. I'm Aura, this is my little brother, Maya.
The one in pants said and slapped the blue and white clad sibling on the back.
Brother.
In a skirt. Well, who am I to judge?
Henry raised an eyebrow in spite of her thought, and it clearly was enough to make Maya blush.
My creator decided I should be something called a T-trap, he said in a charming melodic stutter. I see, well your creator made you both into beautiful children. Henry replied to him and flashed her most winning smile in their direction. It was clearly the right thing to say, and a touch of the arrogant confidence of the one called Aura faded away and became more polite.
Right so. We're here to do a little work.
I'll be clearing out the forest, Aura said and pointed out into the woods, and my little brother will be doing some earth moving for construction.
Lord Ines said the village would need a whole lot done.
Do you have a list of things already, or do we need to figure it out?
Aura's voice was a little sharp despite her seemingly relaxed air, and Henry flinched.
Sister, why you're being rude, Maya stammered, drawing a grateful smile from Henry who bowed her head again.
I don't have a list, because I can't read much.
I know how to sign my name, and that's really about all. I'm sorry.
Henry blushed with shame at her ignorance, but quickly shot out, but I do know what needs to get done. I can tell you everything that would go on a list if I could write it. Her voice ended in a squeak, and the dark elf twins traded a quiet look.
That'll do, but I guess I should add the reading and writing thing to the limitations of the village. Master writes a lot, and you need to be able to tell him when you need things by correspondence. Aura's explanation was so matter-of-fact that Henry wasn't even embarrassed by it. Oh, of course, I can't expect Lord Ines to be at my beck and call. I know what he's done for us. It's already more than we could ask for, and to know he's still looking out for us after our disaster, when he already went so far.
I won't forget it.
I promise, Henry said with the utmost humility, and the remaining frostiness of the red and white clad Aura vanished utterly.
Right, well I'm going to get started.
Maya, you handle things here, Aura said brusquely and faster than Henry's eye could follow. Aura took off in the direction of the forest. While still watching the red blur run, Henry dismissed her cautionary question about whether or not the child would be okay, and when Aura was out of sight, Henry began to explain what the village needed. The next few hours were dreamlike. Taking Maya out to the fields, and after explaining how the soil had to be turned and broken to let vegetable roots go deeper, she could only stare open-mouthed as he took control of the earth and did exactly that. Soil that was hard from lack of use was rendered useful again almost immediately. Afterwards long furrows raced over the ground like some great tunneling creatures were racing one another and creating little long hill ranges. Within minutes, the entire area was ready to be farmed. How did you do that? Henry asked, staring down at the young cross-dressing boy. Magic, nothing special, just 6th tier control earth. Maya explained, and to that, Henry could only answer with a silent, dumb stare. She recalled what Anfia had said to her about tier magic. 3rd and 4th were beyond impressive, 5th was the realm of heroes, and yet this little child had used a tier beyond to see to a farm? Inconceivable, Henry said in a reverential whisper with wide, disbelieving eyes. What else? Maya asked, and in the mind of the largely illiterate peasant, possibilities emerged that were once nothing but absurd fever dreams. Without even thinking, she began rattling off the impossible. Stone walls, stone houses that don't fall apart in storms, sewage that drains and towers to watch for danger, training grounds for people to learn to fight in and. When Henry finally finished, Maya shrugged and asked, is that all? Henry's knees shook and buckled, taking her down to the ground. Is that all? She cried out as dreams became trivialities before the servant of a man who was rapidly becoming more than a mere benefactor in the mind of the peasant girl. A whole village vanished and a lord's son went missing. What a troublesome affair. The count said to Prince Barbaro. Princess Rena stood at the small table where the two nobles sat and quietly poured tea for the two men. My vassal is beside himself, the slender count added and shook his head. He was only a 3rd son, but still, a son. I see. Prince Barbaro's deep voice was largely indifferent, and he ignored his little sister, not acknowledging her pour except to take his porcelain cup and sip from it when she was done. It is unfortunate, but does it really matter?
I can round up some common street trash for you to repopulate the village, if that's all you need. I won't even charge you anything." Barbro had a wicked gleam in his eye when he spoke, and the Count politely ignored it. "Thank you, my prince, but I've already made the land available to third sons of villagers on my land. The vassal who suffered the loss has been a good subordinate. My real concern is the missing boy. A trash noble is still a noble." From what his older brother said, Philip liked to have fun with village girls. Nobody minds, really. Except for the villagers themselves. The Count let out a snort to show what he thought of that opinion. But the fact that he vanished from there and then the whole village was just gone without any sign of violence, it sounds like the peasants put the trash son down themselves and then ran. The Count's suggestion was enough to buy silence from Prince Barbro. Princess Rena finished pouring the cup for the Count, and then putting on her most distressed girlish face, covering her mouth with 3 fingers, she asked him, "Goodness, Count, that is like rebelling against you personally." The Count's relaxed air changed immediately. His entire body tensed up so sharply that even Prince Barbro saw the shift. Until she'd put it that way, the Count dismissed the matter as a minor assault on a minor noble's minor son at most, but from the lips of the princess, he found a new perspective, one he did not appreciate. "Why yes, that's it exactly, Princess Rena." The Count briefly stammered before pretending he saw it that way all along. "Leave it to the royal family to see to the heart of any matter." Rena looked down demurely, an eye to her elder brother. "Of course, it's why the royal family is royal. We recognize that affronts to our most loyal nobles are affronts to ourselves. The basis of the crown is action, and those afraid to act are unworthy of it and should not be supported." In the eyes of Prince Barbro, his incomprehensible and silly little sister laid out his path to the throne. A prince of action is the one that belongs on the throne of kingship. I can use this trivial affair to get ahead of my fat little brother and force father's hand. Yes, it is as my sister says, Barbro agreed. I will take the lead in this investigation, and bring justice for the noble house that was wronged by these stupid peasant brigands. Not to worry. We will find them, and wring the truth of the son's fate from their tortured bodies. He brought his sword out and said, "I swear it on my sword." A powerful man of broad shoulders and towering over both Rena and the Count, dressed in full formal martial regalia, of blue, red, and gold, with dangling tassels on his shoulders and a sash across his chest, the blonde-bearded Prince Barbro appeared every inch the warrior prince. Rena demurely clapped her hands with a smile and girlish giggle, but he's a coward and a bully. Never once did he take a task that might actually risk himself. Despite the thought, the third Princess Rena wore a mask of being duly impressed with the grandiose gesture of her older brother. The Count drank down the rest of the tea and bowed his head. "Yes, of course, a prince who protects the nobility is the sort we need on the throne of Riestais. I will look to you in the days ahead, my prince," the Count said and stood up. When he was gone after their brief goodbyes, Prince Barbro looked down at his little sister. Absurd as she was, he was aware that she sometimes had interesting insights, and he wasn't above asking for them. "She's no threat to me," he reminded himself, then asked her, "Sister, where would you begin on this?" Rena tapped her cheek with one finger and looked away. The room in which they stood was the height of royal luxury. The table they'd been sitting at was the color of the sun, the floors clean white marble, and her clothing was of the purest white, a flowing dress that hung down to her ankles, and a gold circlet that dangled a small chain over her forehead that shook when she turned her head. The third princess looked to the broad window to the outside world beyond the palace. She took a few steps from him and looked out into the city beyond. As capitals went, Riestais had what she was sure was one of the ugliest in nature. Massive in size, it was riddled with crime and squalor. Beyond that, high walls stood that kept the squalor safe to prey on its own. "Brother," the princess asked, "except to take their goods to market, peasants don't move around much, do they?" No, they don't," he answered, "they have no reason to move." "And do you think peasants who only know how to farm, and can only hunt a little, would venture into a forest full of dangerous monsters?" Princess Rena asked. "No," Prince Barbro answered again, and moved over to where she stood. She glanced away from the view where the sun shone in on her face and glinted from her long golden hair, and looked up to him. He may be able to see farther because of his height, but with that brain I doubt he can see past his own nose. Her contempt for her sibling was as thick as stew and rich as her family's treasury room,
and it was perfectly concealed behind a smiling mask. And they probably won't go to a city because they wouldn't know how to survive, so you just need to look for a village where there are a bunch of new people. We do keep birth records in the villages after all. She reminded him with a sweet, innocent smile that, as it always did, pushed aside any feeling of inferiority he would have felt from a different tone. But those are never very good, he said to her. Besides, any new census will just have the villagers lying about their names. True, but if a village goes from 100 families to 200 families, I think we should ask where those other 100 families came from, don't you agree, dear brother? I think it's safe to say any village with a sudden burst of growth is suspect, and then we just have the Lord come by and look for anyone he recognizes as being from his domain. The princess lowered her hand in a gentle, graceful gesture, so that one was folded over the other in front of her waist. I see. Prince Barbara muttered, and it was somewhat true. What she said made sense, and he nodded sagely as if he'd been leading the conversation himself. Do you really think a village would take in so many people? He asked with a furrowed brow. The notion of split inheritance was familiar enough that he imagined it applied to peasants as well, and her suggestion became less likely. Maybe, if they have more land to work than people to work it, or if they suffered some recent heavy losses and are in need of replacements to work what land they have. Rena pointed out, and suddenly her suggestion became probable again within his mind. Then she added, I would imagine they would even overlook the murder of a lord, rather than turn them in as they know they should. They are all peasants after all. It rubbed Prince Barbaro in just the wrong way. His teeth gritted when his jaw clenched. Then they're complicit in the crime, and the whole place can just burn when we find it. As you think best, big brother, Rena said with a tranquil voice. Forgive me, but this is all a bit much and I would like to return to my embroidery. The fragile young girl, the golden princess, the most radiant beauty of the kingdom, seemed very doll-like to the powerfully built Prince Barbaro, and he didn't question her words at all. Of course, sister, I will remember your suggestion, and as thanks, I will forget your bodyguard's offense to me. Thank you, brother, that is reward enough. He was only trying to protect me, and he is just a child. Still, your generosity will also be remembered. Rena replied, and taking the sides of her gown, she curtsied with a bowed head. They then parted ways. Her sharp ears caught Barbaro coming up with various ways to kill treacherous peasant trash, until she was out of hearing and back in her own room. As soon as the door clicked behind her and she'd thrown the latch for additional needless security, she went down to her knees and prostrated herself before the empty air. Is that more or less what you had in mind, Lord Demiurge? Princess Rena asked, and in front of her, a whirling void of darkness opened, from which the archdevil himself emerged. That it is exactly, Princess Rena. That it is exactly, Demiurge said, and he reached down to gently pat her head with a smile plastered onto his face. Volume 2 Chapter 4. So it's like that, is it? King Ramposa asked from his seat on the throne. The massive room was empty by the king's own order, at the express request of the royal head warrior. Yes, my king, Gazif said from his kneeling position a few feet from the throne. Alone as they were, the aged king with his loose white hair allowed the royal head warrior to stand and speak as one would to a friend, but in such times as this, the formality was done at Gazif's own will. So much power emerging into the world. It is like something out of the stories drawn from the mists of time. King Ramposa said, rising from the red-cushioned chair and its ornate golden frame. He stepped away and approached the warrior, placing a hand on Gazif's head. He added, "It is good that you came back alive. It is a great relief to my heart." "Thank you, my king," Gazif said, closing his eyes briefly, "and yes, it's like something out of legends. Ainz Ulgaun driving off a scripture, Momen and Axel defeating two skeletal dragons, ending Azur and an offshoot threat, and taking down both a black scripture and a necromancer on par with an adamantite mage. This is quite a lot to take in." The king's aged hand slipped away from Gazif's head and fell back to his side, and the old man began to pace. Gazif froze to follow him. The red and gold robes fluttered around the king's legs as he walked. It was a curious habit of the old man. He likes to think in motion. Gazif acknowledged with no small approval. Though old now, the old man remained fit and ready to do his duty. Despite his age, he was still an echo of the vigor of his youth, of which Gazif had heard only stories. "And you say that this Momen is likely to visit here soon?" King Ramposa asked.
So Moman pledged, and I believe he will. I gave him my word that he would be well rewarded for his service to your majesty. Gazif's voice was somehow both imposing and humble at the same moment, and Ramposa gave a sagely nod of understanding. Yes, something like this. We want him to be friendly to the crown. The king said with patient thought as he paced about the massive columned hall. He never drifted too far from Gazif, as though the warrior was a kind of anchor, and like a good anchor, Gazif never wavered. The noble faction has used our annual war with the Empire to keep their privileges high, and it is killing us. The king said and snapped his head down toward the head warrior. Gazif met the proud eyes of the old man. It was the first open acknowledgement of what the warrior had long suspected. How long? He asked. Long enough that if I live 10 more years, even if nothing else goes wrong, my sons will inherit only the headsman's axe. If I were to have 20 years in me, I wouldn't see the last of them without living on the run. King Ramposa admitted, something has to change. When a man says that, my king, they're typically about to say what bothers him, Gazif said, and though it felt as if the world was opening up beneath his feet with the king's words, he did not tumble into the black pit of despair that lay beneath. Yes, the appearance of Axel and an unknown mage of great power offers a chance we didn't have before. A chance for new nobility to rise. Even the finest of the old guard are almost all worthless to the kingdom's prosperity, and some are harmful. The king said the last word with great bitterness, and what he meant was no secret. 8 fingers. The criminal organization was beyond brutal, distributing black dust, an addictive narcotic, throughout the kingdom and eroding its wealth. Corrupt nobles sometimes grew the plants used to make it in their own villages. Attempts at eradicating the practice had been ineffective, and many a judge had been threatened or killed. Many nobles were either bought and paid for or intimidated into silence, and thus nobody stood against them. Your Majesty, do you wish to hire them to eliminate the criminal organization? They are only 2, they need spies, intelligence, leverage. The amount of things needed for something like that. Gazif's mind was spiraling as he considered the matter. My lord. The royal warrior trailed off. Nobility, they're adventurers, but new and very powerful, they just barely registered. The guild might be upset, but if they were given a title and retirement and a task that the guild would covertly favor? Gazif's mind flew to the obvious. The king was looking down at him, speaking without saying anything. By his side again, the relationship of years spanned the silence to reveal the truth. Ains, you wish to hire Ains to help in the war against the Empire, and to ennoble all 3. It was a guess on Gazif's part, but not one he considered unlikely, and when a subtle nod came from the white-bearded old king, Gazif was again grateful to have such a lord to serve. If we can arrange for them all to be here at once, that would be better. But that requires predictability that the powerful typically don't have. King Ramposa gave a mild laugh at his own expense, but Gazif didn't share it. My king, Sir Moman indicated that he would make Carney Village his base of operations, and Master Gown may have kept a watch on the place after rescuing it. If we send a message to Erantle, we can have word sent asking for both to a formal ceremony in the capital. I can't imagine they would refuse such a thing. Gazif's voice was somewhat uncertain by the end, but he began with confidence. It is worth a try. If it works out, we may have powerful allies to spring on the Empire when the time comes. If only. King Ramposa killed his own words, but the thoughts, unspoken, went on. If only one of my sons had your vigor and strength, if only one of them had all the qualities of my royal head warrior, I would be able to retire now. If only I had my own lost youth back, if only, if only, if only. Things were not as they are. Sabos knelt before his liege with the greatest reverence. My lord, I am prepared to receive your orders. How may I serve you? The faint scent of Albedo's perfume lingered in the room, though it was cleanly made. There was no doubt of why the scent seemed to linger strongest there. Her visits to Ains's room had become so regular that one could have told time based on that alone. What struck the aged, dignified-looking butler as strange was that they met in his room, and not in the throne room itself. He can do as he wants, the one who stayed. But still, it is strange. Sabos considered the question with care, and found no answer until his lord, still dressed in his warrior regalia, laid a hand on Sabos' head. Am I the master of Nazarick? Am I the one to whom you are loyal, no matter what? Ains asked the question as he had rehearsed it. Sabos was above all, a dignified servant, and so Ainz wanted to present himself as his dignified master when the time came. And the time had come. The gesture of affection was both unlooked for and more welcome than Sabos expected. His tight, tense lips barely moved, but he did suck in his breath at the sudden act. "You are Lord Ainz, the one who stayed, to whom our lives and our loyalty are the same," Sabos replied without reservation. "And if what your Lord Ainz is, should change?" Ainz asked him. Out of all the guardians, he was most sure Sabos would remain absolutely loyal. "Soon I'll run out of the easy ones." Ainz told himself to mentally prepare for the day he had to tell Solution, or Nabril, or Demiurge, or Albedo. But telling himself was easier than doing so. "Then my loyalty remains the same," Sabos answered. It was a relief to hear, but it didn't stop Ainz's train of thought. "Sabos is the third level 100 being for me to tell, and even less likely to resist me than Cocytus. I would have preferred to tell him first after Pandora's actor, if only I hadn't needed to reveal it to a guardian. But still, even if it comes down to it, I'm now level 102. I can handle Sabos if I need to." Still, it was a relief. And so Ainz held his hand steady as he removed his helmet, and revealed his human face. "Look at me, Sabos. Look, and know your master," Ainz ordered, and Sabos raised his head, though Ainz's heart was fluttering and his stomach roiling as it had when the truth was made known to Lupus Regina. He kept his eyes steady. "Sire. What is this?" the butler of steel asked with breathless confusion. "A spell gone wrong. I don't know how it happened, but it has. Now, has your loyalty changed? Or are you still my servant?" It was the critical question, and with it came the answer Ainz expected at least this time. "I am your servant, you are the one who stayed, my lord. I bend to your will, now and forever," Sabos said, without hesitation. Relief flooded through Ainz from tension he hadn't known he felt. "Then I have a task for you. I want you to visit the Baharuth Empire, take whatever battlement that you wish, and establish yourselves as wealthy figures. While there, this is what I want you to do." When Ainz finished his explanation, Sabos's thoughts turned inward. "I believe Solution would be well suited for this task." "Good," Ainz replied and reached into his pocket dimension to remove the coins he'd acquired earlier. He threw them at Sabos's feet. "Have these melted down and exchange them for Baharuthian currency, then see to it at once." "I will not fail you, my lord. The purges in Baharuth left many empty manors. We can easily acquire one and integrate ourselves for your purposes." Sabos took out the coins and put them into his own pocket dimension, and stood up when his master stepped back and put the helmet back on. "Good, I place my trust in you, Sabos. Do as you have said, and do not fail me," Ainz ordered, and Sabos withdrew. When he was alone on his bed, he dismissed his perfect warrior spell and went to his bed. He fell backwards with a deep sigh and his arms spread out to take up as much of it as possible. The room was thematically black, with grim, Gothic furnishings befitting an overlord of death. "I was such a tunibio," he mentally exclaimed, and staring up at the dark ceiling, in spite of, or perhaps because of, his circumstances, he began to laugh. Back home, his lungs were stained and scarred from the toxic air, his body ached to the point where everything hurt, like it was for everybody else's his old world. His diet had left him in poor health and as he knew it, he had no future. Now? Here? In this body? He was the definition of strong compared to any human and probably a fair number of monsters. Every breath came easily and without pain, every step was light as air. The sun, the moon, the stars, everything was real and visible, and despite his concerns that still lingered, things were going well. "I'm free. I'm free of that old hell. That nightmare world is gone and I have everything I dreamed of." He laughed, and laughed, and laughed some more. Ainz laughed on the bed, staring up at the ceiling and utterly at ease alone in his room where he would remain undisturbed. Whether his spirits rose because of the laughter, or the laughter grew because his spirits rose, he didn't know, but he was still laughing when the message spell came in. He heard Aura's voice in his head as soon as the message spell connected. "Lord Ainz, we have an urgent message for you, as both Moman and as Lord Gaun. From Gazif Stranov." This had his attention. The laughter of the human male on the bed vanished. "What is it?" he demanded. "My lord, both of you have been invited to the capital for a feast. The king wishes to show his gratitude for the help given to his people." Aura explained, "The invitation is for 1 month from now." "I see, and how did you maintain my cover?" Ainz pressed.
My lord, Lupus Regina accepted for Moman, and I promised to pass on word to Lord Gown.
Aura explained, briefly sounding uncharacteristically nervous. She heard the edge in my question, better to reassure her. Ainz thought, and then answered, it's fine, you did well. I will be arriving in the village soon, and notify Pandora's actor that he needs to be prepared to play as myself in a few days. A thought occurred to him immediately afterward. Aura, not that I mind, but why didn't Lupus Regina notify me instead of you?
Oh, my lord, she's peeping on Henry and Nfoya right now. She said you wanted the pair kept safe, so I offered to contact you for her while she watched. What she said was an adult performance art. I don't know quite what she means, but it got really loud and there was screaming involved, some kind of wrestling I guess. Ainz was even more glad for his isolation in that moment when his face turned red.
Oh yes. Yes, that's right, it's fine, thank you Aura, leave her to it, give them some time, I will be joining you. Later than I initially intended. He rolled his eyes, and his humanity smacked him in the face like an unexpected door. Henry was a pretty young woman, it was no surprise she was engaged in a liaison with the brilliant young pharmacist. A pity about his grandmother, he must have rushed back to Carney for comfort, and at least gotten it. Recalling all his recent actions, fueled by a powerful body and his own anxiety and ambition mixed together, he suddenly felt overwhelmingly tired. I can't wait, my lord. Aura's childish innocence helped to curb the flush on Ainz's cheeks after the connection cut, and for a solid minute, Ainz remained lying flat on the bed. That kind of made me wish for my undead body back. He muttered and took a deep breath. The scent of perfume lingered in the air, and for a long time, he slept, resting at his ease through dreams of wings enfolding his body, and the moans of ecstasy from a demoness designed to be the goddess of beauty herself. Somehow, he knew it was a dream, but such was the warmth of the imagined embrace, that he did not want to wake up.